Now, it goes on at the end of chapter 12 to say that the word of God continued to increase and spread. And then when Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission, I should have said in chapter 11, a prophet in Antioch predicts a famine in Jerusalem. And so they collect these gifts for the believers in Jerusalem, and Barnabas and Saul go back to Jerusalem with these gifts of money for these people in tough times. So when they finished that gift, they went back. They went back to Antioch, and then this is where chapter 13 begins, sort of the missionary journeys of Paul. Really, in Antioch, at this church, God had sent people to various places. God had said to Philip or Peter or whoever, Stephen, this is where you should go and this is what you should do. But it's in chapter 13, finally, that the church in Antioch, by the prompting of God, sends its first missionaries. And it sends Barnabas and Saul to be missionaries. They go to the island of Cyprus, and they work there. And the story there is of they get a chance to meet with the proconsul, the governor, the person in charge. And he has sort of a sorcerer who's around him, who's keeping the message from being spoken clearly. And Paul confronts him in a very, very open and upfront way. Elymas is his name, and he confronts him. And then so he's blinded and can't function anymore. And then the message takes hold then in Cyprus. Then they move on from Cyprus to Pisidian Antioch, to Turkey. And it's in Pisidian Antioch that Paul gives his first sermon, or that we have his first recorded sermon. And it's very similar to many of the other sermons. He comes from the Old Testament. He's at a synagogue, for one thing. That's where they started. He comes with the Old Testament, spending time there, leading up to this man, Jesus. And in that conversation, he talks about, in verses 38 and 39 of chapter 13, some very, very powerful verses in the book of Acts. He says to them in the middle of his sermon, "Therefore, my brothers, I want you to know that through Jesus, the forgiveness of sins is proclaimed to you. Through him, everyone who believes is justified from everything you could not be justified from by the law of Moses." You see, he's just spent time in the Old Testament talking about this relationship the people had with God, and that Moses brought the Ten Commandments, and that Moses had these rules. But he's going back to that, saying, look, all of those things that God did for us, all the relationship we had with God in the Old Testament, we still could not get over the top. We could not figure out a way to deal with our inability to keep those laws, to keep those things. And so he says, in Jesus, you are justified from everything that you could not figure out a way to be justified from in the Old Testament. And so it's really a very theological point. Most of the preaching to this point had been just proclamation. This is who Jesus is. This is what he did. You can be forgiven. But here, Paul begins to add sort of a deeper theology to the preaching, where he kind of contrasts the relationship of the Old Testament and the failure of the people in the Old Testament to be able to fulfill that law, to now Jesus having fulfilled it. In him we are justified from the things we could not be justified before. And so Paul begins to add some depth, some reasoning to this preaching, to this message. And that's one of the great benefits of having Paul be the person who does this, is that he's very well educated. He's got a Greek education as well. He's very literate, and he begins to argue with people the way that Greek philosophers would have argued. And so he begins to add some depth to the preaching. What happens is as they're leaving the synagogue, the city, the people come and say, look, come back and talk to us again and again and again. We want to know more. And so in chapter 13, so they come back, and the next Sabbath, it says in verse 44, almost the whole city gathered to hear the word of the Lord. And then it goes back to a recurring theme that the Jews were jealous. They stirred up trouble, and Barnabas and Saul have to leave Pisidian Antioch and move on to another city. Because it's too dangerous, it's too hard to move around, it's not effective anymore. And so they move on to another city to get away from the Jews who are upset. But in the moving on, it's now a publicly stated change in the philosophy, I don't know, tactics of the gospel. When they leave, they say, look, we had to come to the Jews first. We had to come to the synagogue first, but now we are going to the Gentiles. And since you rejected it, we're going to them. And they use this phrase, for this is what the Lord has commanded us. I have made you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth. And so we begin to see from the small things of an Ethiopian eunuch, a Samaritan city, to Peter in Caesarea at Cornelius' house, to Antioch and the Greeks, to a missionary zeal now from the church in Antioch, to now Paul and Barnabas saying publicly that God has set them up to be a light to the Gentiles. God has set them up to be the apostles, the teachers, the missionaries to the Gentiles. That is a purpose now. It's not just a byproduct that they're surprised about. It's the purpose now. So again, in 11, 12, and 13, we continue to see the church wrestle with the idea of the Gentiles. We continue to see the church wrestle with Jewish opposition. We continue to see them try to sort out exactly how this is all supposed to work. And so this section ends in 13 with Paul and Barnabas saying, look, there are missionaries still to the Jews, but we are a light to the Gentiles. We are missionaries to the Gentiles. So there you go. You're going to have some questions to answer. Again, if you have questions you want to ask me, email me, and I'll be happy to email you back. Hopefully this is helpful to you. Have a great day, and hope to see you on Easter Sunday. Thank you.